so happy we alive.
Handed certain privileges in our society, the more we can realize this is a complete farce. As a person in medicine, I feel that doctors and physicians have really shirked a lot of their responsibility on this issue. I mean, when we had it in our formulary in the United States from mid-1840s to 1941, cannabis as a medicine, there was multiple pages of indications. And that completely, all of a sudden, those indications don't exist anymore. Did the plant's genetics change? Did its mechanism of action change? Did people just stop responding to it? I mean, why would we all of a sudden become mum about it? And I think that there's been a complete shirking of our recognition on that point. We should call it for what it is. It is a medicinal plant, a legitimate medicinal plant, or what the FDA would call a botanical medicine. These are we understand these things. These aren't crazy far out concepts. This is stuff that we're using in medicine today, and we have for a long time. And I think doctors and physicians need to kind of cut through that and recognize it for what it is. It is, but given the climate that we have a situation where the doctors cannot, in the 11 states where it's allowed in this country, they can recommend it, but they can't be around it. How many medicines have you ever seen where the doctor is not allowed to touch the medicine to give to the patient? How are we supposed to administer it? It's completely the most insane idea. When you have the WHO has recognized cannabis as a medicine, several countries around the world have recognized it as a medicine. What I call this is an American federal denialism of cannabis as a medicine. And then certainly we've been talking about moral issues. There's something called moralism, and I think that moralism is also part of our definitions of mental disorders. Cannabis abuse, marijuana abuse that Vivian talked about, there's actually, if you look in the DSM, I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow on a panel, there's an incredible amount of moralism that goes on if you read people's understanding of what it means to have a cannabis abuse disorder. The idea there is you must be completely crazy to use cannabis because it's illegal. Or you must be on your way to becoming crazy. When I say crazy, I mean mentally disordered. And these aren't things that we should throw around lightly. Mental disorders have been thrown around for a long time, and as everyone knows, homosexuality was in the DSM until 1973. And I was just reading a little history of Seattle. People were lobotomized in the psychiatric institutions in Washington State because they were had a antisocial personality disturbance. That's how homosexuality was understood. And I feel really happy talking about that here in San Francisco, which has completely been a bastion of safety on these issues. And I think in the same way. Okay, sure. All right. Well, that's part of the moralism that I want to actually try to address as well in my work. And I guess to wrap up, I'll just say it's a complete honor to be on this panel with these folks, and I hope to I hope for a future that where cannabis mythology and cannabophobia is completely eradicated. Thank you very much.
I like the word cannaphobia. You all will be happy to know that my frontal lobe is still intact. They didn't get me. Not yet. When we talk about people who can walk in different circles, I think our next panelist is a fantastic example of someone who has dealt hands-on with people who really have been affected negatively by these laws. When I was at the Normal Conference in 2001, it was over 420 in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, in the other Washington, there was a rally, and it was focused around René Boget and other people affected by marijuana laws in U.S. and North America. And this next panelist showed up wearing interesting clothing, I was told, very colorful, cultural, and in the course of her speech managed to transform from the image of someone who appears to be primarily aligned with the counterculture to someone who was aligned with mainstream culture. And she indeed has dealt with people from all walks of life and exhibits really the importance of being able to do so. For the past 11 years, she focused her private criminal defense practice on defending the rights and property of individuals accused of committing drug offenses. She is the Vice President West of the Washington Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, a past chair of the Legal Frameworks Committee for the King County Bar Association's Drug Policy Project, and she is also on the Marijuana Policy Review Panel, which oversees marijuana enforcement in the city of Seattle. Just this week, on Monday in fact, she began her new phase of her career, joining the ACLU of Washington on the Marijuana Education Project as its director. She is really got quite a bit of conviction to stop convictions. Please welcome Allison Holcomb.
Being introduced by Dominic is both a blessing and a curse. He gives the most wonderful introductions, but then you have to follow them. In 1996, I was the lawyer who represented Martin Martinez on his first trial for medical marijuana use. And this was the first time in my life that I had ever defended a medical marijuana patient. It was also the first medical marijuana case that had been brought in King County, and it predated Washington's medical marijuana law. The things that I remember the most about representing Martin and his experiences, and the time that he sat with me talking about his motorcycle accident and the ungodly amounts of morphine that were pumped through his system for the months that he was in hospital care, and how he was able to use marijuana to go on through literally bone-crushing injuries, damage to his optical nerve, calcification of all of his joints that limited his mobility, and become a carpenter again, building and remodeling people's homes while using medical marijuana. It was what he needed to control his pain and to have a normal life again, and not to give up any reason for living. That was a very powerful moment in my life. The trial lasted for 2 weeks. Martin may remember at one point we had to take a break because as I was cross-examining the DEA agent who was testifying about the anticipated yield from Martin's garden, I challenged the basis of the data for the yield that he was describing Martin's grow being able to produce, and referenced what some of you may know about as the outdoor grows that were used in Texas by the government to establish what a plant could yield, and of course have these figures that ballooned enormously. We had to take a break because the DEA agent got uncomfortable and had to call back to Washington, D.C. to see if he could answer my questions from this public document. It's kind of odd. And the last thing that was very interesting about the case is the verdict was, actually it's not a verdict, it was a mistrial. The jury hung. And as I talked to a number of the jurors after the trial, I learned that originally in the deliberations, the vote had broken down 9-3. There were 8 women on the jury and 4 men. 1 man was on the side of the women to acquit Martin. And after enough time had gone by and he had been browbeaten by his male counterparts on the jury, he changed his vote, and ultimately the jury hung 8 women to acquit and 4 men to convict. I think there's a lesson there for us. I think there's a lesson too in the reasons that were given, that the women said, I looked at him, and as a mother or a grandmother or a sister, I could not see how we could justify denying this to this man who was able to live his life specifically because he used medical marijuana. And that was the instinct that was used by those women to justify the conclusions that they reached. The men, on the other hand, talked about not being able to quantify pain, not being able to